You gave your children everything and lost yourself. One morning you looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. That stranger was you. You had spent decades pouring every ounce of love into your kids. You skipped meals so they could eat well. You wore the same old clothes year after year. You put aside every dream you ever had for yourself. And now they are grown and living their own lives. They have careers and families and busy schedules. But somehow you are not part of that picture. Your phone sits silent on the kitchen counter for days. When you do call, they sound rushed and distracted. The conversations feel hollow, like talking through glass. You can sense them pulling away with every word. And it cuts deeper than anything you have ever felt. You did everything right, or at least you thought you did. You sacrificed your youth, your ambitions, your happiness. You showed up every single day without complaint. So why does it feel like none of it mattered? Why does it feel like your love was returned with silence? If you stay with this story until the very end, you will learn how to set down that crushing weight. You will discover how to find your own name again. Not someone's mom or someone's dad, but just you. The real you that got buried under years of giving. This is not about blame or guilt or regret. This is about understanding a painful truth. The deeper your devotion, the wider the distance grew. And that distance is not proof that love failed. It is proof that love needs room to breathe. So let us walk through this together step by step. Let us look honestly at what happened and why. And most importantly, let us find the way forward. A way that heals both you and your children. A way that brings everyone closer by letting go. There is a psychological concept that explains this. It is called introject values. It sounds complicated, but the idea is quite simple. It means absorbing beliefs from the outside world. You take in expectations without questioning them. You accept them as your own deepest convictions. For many parents of a certain generation, this hit hard. The belief was that your child's success was yours. If your kid made it, then you made it too. If your kid struggled, then you had failed as a parent. This belief was passed down through families for ages. It came from a culture that valued sacrifice above all. It came from economic hardship and survival instincts. It came from watching your own parents do the same thing. And so you carried this belief like a sacred torch. You never stopped to ask if it was actually true. You never wondered if it might be doing harm. You simply poured everything into your children. You erased yourself one small piece at a time. Your hobbies disappeared first, then your friendships. Then your health, and then your sense of identity. Until one day there was nothing left but the role. You were only a parent and nothing else. The problem with introject values is subtle but deadly. When you build your entire identity around one role, when that role changes or ends, you collapse inside. You do not just feel sad, you feel like you vanished. Because in a very real psychological sense, you did vanish. You stopped existing as an independent person years ago. Everything that made you uniquely you was set aside. And now that your children have moved on from needing you, there is simply nothing underneath to catch your fall. Think about this honestly for just a moment, please. If someone told you they destroyed their entire life for you, if they said they gave up every dream, every pleasure, if they said they sacrificed their health and happiness, how would that make you feel deep in your gut? You would feel grateful, yes, that is natural and human. But you would also feel an unbearable pressure inside. You would feel like you owe a debt you can never repay. You would feel suffocated by the weight of that sacrifice. Every time you saw that person, you would feel guilty. Every time they reminded you of what they gave up, you would want to run away just to breathe again. That is exactly what your children are experiencing right now. They are not ungrateful or cold or heartless people. They love you more than you might ever realize. But your sacrifice became a mountain on their shoulders. And the only way they know to survive is distance. They pull back not because they do not care. They pull back because the weight is too much to carry. There was a woman named Margaret who lived this story. She had dreamed of being an artist when she was young. She could paint the most beautiful watercolor landscapes. Her teachers told her she had real genuine talent. But then life happened the way it often does for women. She got married and had children and set her brushes aside. She told herself it was temporary, just for a few years. But a few years turned into a decade, then 2, then 3. Margaret poured all of her creative energy into her kids. She helped with every school project, every science fair. She drove them to lessons and practices and tournaments. She stayed up late sewing costumes for school plays. She never once complained about any of it either. She genuinely believed this was what love looked like. Her children grew up accomplished and successful in life. Her daughter became a doctor and her son became a lawyer. Margaret should have felt proud and fulfilled and complete. But instead she felt something unexpected and confusing. She felt empty, like a vessel that had been poured out dry. And then the real trouble started in small, quiet ways. Margaret began calling her children multiple times a day. She wanted to know every detail of their daily lives. She offered unsolicited advice about everything imaginable. She commented on their parenting, their cooking, their choices. When they did not respond quickly enough, she felt abandoned. She would say things like, "After everything I did for you." She would remind them of the meals she skipped for them. She would bring up every sacrifice like a running ledger. The phrase, "Do you know what I gave up for you?" became constant. It was not manipulation in any cruel or calculated sense. Margaret genuinely felt she had earned their full attention. She believed her decades of sacrifice entitled her to closeness. But every time she said those words, her children flinched. They did not flinch because they were ungrateful or selfish. They flinched because they could feel the weight of that debt. And they knew deep down they could never fully repay it. No amount of phone calls or visits would ever be enough. No amount of gifts or kind words would settle the account. Because the account was bottomless and always growing larger. Margaret's daughter finally said something that changed everything. She said, "Mom, I love you, but I cannot be your whole world." She said, "Every time we talk I feel like I am failing you." She said, "I want to call you because I miss you, not guilt." Those words hit Margaret like a freight train at full speed. She cried for 3 days straight, barely eating or sleeping. But somewhere in that grief a tiny light turned on inside. She realized her daughter was not rejecting her love at all. Her daughter was begging for a different kind of love. A love that did not come with strings and conditions attached. A love that did not require constant proof and validation. A love that simply existed freely and without obligation. There was another story about a man named Robert too. Robert had worked his entire life at a factory job. He never loved the work, but it paid the bills reliably. Every single paycheck went to his family without exception. He drove a beat-up old truck for 22 years straight. He wore the same 3 work shirts until they had holes. He never bought himself a book or a record or anything. Robert's entire identity was built around being a provider. His son James was everything Robert never got to be himself. James was smart and athletic and naturally charismatic too. Robert saw in James all the potential he never fulfilled. So he pushed James hard, maybe harder than he should have. He used every connection, every favor, every saved dollar. He made sure James got into the best schools available nearby. He hired tutors and coaches and mentors for his boy. James did not disappoint his father in any measurable way. He graduated at the top of his class with highest honors. He got recruited by a prestigious company right after college. He married a wonderful woman and seemed to have it all figured. Robert should have been the proudest father in the world then. And for a brief shining moment he actually was proud. But then something unexpected and devastating happened to Robert. James volunteered for an overseas position with his company. He moved his family across the ocean without looking back once. He called less and less as the months slowly ticked by. Holidays came and went without James making the trip home. Robert sat alone at the kitchen table on Christmas morning once. He stared at the empty chairs and felt his heart crack open. He could not understand how his son could just leave like that. He felt betrayed and abandoned and utterly used up completely. He told his friends that he raised an ungrateful, selfish son. But the truth was far more complicated than Robert could see. James later confided in a therapist about his decision to leave. He said his father's expectations felt like a prison cell to him. Every achievement was never quite enough to satisfy his dad fully. Every success just raised the bar higher for the next one ahead. James felt like he was not living his own life at all anymore. He was living a life designed to make his father feel complete. The only way James could find out who he really was inside. The only way he could breathe and think his own thoughts freely was to put an ocean between himself and his father's dreams. James did not leave because he hated Robert or felt nothing for him. James left because staying would have slowly suffocated his soul. Robert's gift to his son was never really about opportunity at all. It was about a compulsion that James had to succeed or else. The or else was never spoken aloud, but it was always there. It hung in the air like a storm cloud that never quite broke. If James failed, he would be letting down the man who gave everything. That is not a gift, that is a sentence handed down from above. That is not love, that is a contract signed under duress and fear. A British pediatrician and psychoanalyst named Dr. Harrison Wells. He spent decades studying the relationship between parents and kids. He observed something that seems contradictory at first glance actually. The parents who sacrificed the most often had the worst outcomes. Not because sacrifice itself is wrong or harmful in nature, but because total self-erasure removes something children desperately need. Children need to see their parents as whole, complete human beings. They need to see mom and dad enjoying life and pursuing passions. They need to see that adults can be happy on their own terms. When a child only sees a parent who has given up everything, that child learns that love means destroying yourself for others. That child grows up either crushed by guilt or running from closeness. Neither outcome is what any loving parent would ever want. Dr. Wells coined a phrase that has become legendary in psychology. He said what children need is not a perfect, devoted parent. What children need is a good enough parent and nothing more. A good enough parent makes mistakes and admits them openly. A good enough parent has their own hobbies and their own friends. A good enough parent sometimes says, "Not right now, I need space." A good enough parent shows their children what a full life looks like. And paradoxically, that good enough parent raises healthier children. Children who are more emotionally secure and less anxious overall. Children who form better relationships and handle stress more effectively. Children who do not carry the crushing weight of parental sacrifice. The moment you erase yourself completely for your children's sake, your children are forced to carry your unlived life on their backs. They walk through the world with the weight of two lives now. Their own life and the ghost of the life you gave up for them. That is not a blessing, it is an invisible burden they never asked for. And they may not even realize they are carrying it for years. It shows up as anxiety or guilt or difficulty setting boundaries. It shows up as resentment they feel ashamed of even having inside. It shows up as distance because distance is the only relief they know. Are you feeling something stir in your chest right now reading this? Has there been a moment when you looked into your child's eyes? And instead of seeing gratitude, you saw something else entirely. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was a quiet, desperate plea. A plea that said, "Please let me love you without owing you everything." If you saw that look, then you already know the truth deep down. Your love was never the problem, not for a single moment ever. The direction of your love was the only thing that went astray. When all of your love flows in only one direction, outward toward them, it creates a flood that drowns everyone, including you yourself. But there is an even more uncomfortable truth hiding beneath all of this. There is a concept in psychology called the hedonic treadmill effect. It was identified by researchers Dr. Alan Morrison and Dr. Patricia Webb. They discovered something fascinating about human happiness and satisfaction. No matter how much happiness we achieve, we always adapt to it. We always return to our baseline emotional state eventually, no matter what. Think about the last time you got something you really, really wanted. A new car or a new home or a promotion at work maybe. The excitement lasted for a few weeks, perhaps a month at most. Then it faded and you were back to your normal emotional level. This happens with everything, including the sacrifices parents make for kids. When this treadmill effect meets parental sacrifice, the results are devastating. Here is how the cycle works in painful and predictable fashion. At first, paying for a small tutoring class feels enormously satisfying. You feel like a wonderful parent providing for your child's future. But soon that satisfaction fades and you need to do something bigger. So you pay for a more expensive program or a better school district. That feels good for a while, but then that satisfaction fades too. So you push harder and sacrifice more and give up even more of yourself. The bar keeps rising, but the satisfaction keeps shrinking every single time. You are running faster and faster on a wheel that never stops spinning. And the worst part is your children are adapting right alongside you. What once felt like an extraordinary gift now feels perfectly ordinary. What once inspired deep gratitude now barely registers as notable at all. They are not becoming spoiled or entitled in any deliberate way. Their brains are simply doing what all human brains naturally do. They are adapting to the new normal that you keep creating for them. There was a man named George who embodied this cycle perfectly in life. George worked 2 jobs for over 30 years without a single vacation. He never bought himself anything that was not absolutely necessary for survival. No books, no music, no comfortable shoes, nothing at all for himself. But for his 3 children he spared absolutely no expense whatsoever. He sent them to the finest summer camps and international exchange programs. He bought them the latest technology and the most fashionable clothing available. He paid for their college tuition and their first apartments and their weddings. George believed that providing materially was the ultimate form of fatherly love. But something strange and heartbreaking started happening over the years gradually. His children stopped saying thank you with the same genuine warmth as before. They started asking for more without acknowledging what had already been given. One daughter called only when she needed money for something new and expensive. One son forgot George's birthday 2 years in a row without even apologizing. George sat in his worn-out recliner one evening and wept silently to himself. He could not understand how his children had become so seemingly indifferent. But the answer was hiding in plain sight the entire time right there. George had never shared himself with his children, only his wallet and labor. He never sat down and told them about his childhood dreams or his fears. He never took them fishing or taught them how to fix things around home. He never showed vulnerability or asked for their opinions about his own life matters. He was a provider and nothing else in their eyes and their experience of him. So when they thought of their father, they thought of what he could give. Not who he was as a human being with his own story and his own heart. The emotional connection was never built because George was always too busy working. He was too busy sacrificing to actually be present in the moments that mattered. His children did not learn to love the man behind the sacrifices at all. They learned to depend on the results of his labor and nothing deeper than that. When the results stopped flowing, the connection had nothing else to stand on. Sacrifice without emotional presence is like building a house with no foundation. It looks impressive from the outside, but it cannot withstand any real storm. The walls crack and the roof leaks, and eventually the whole structure collapses. George's story is a warning for every parent who confuses provision with love. Providing for your children financially is important and necessary, of course it is. But it is only one small piece of a much larger and more complex puzzle. Your children need your stories, your laughter, your honest, vulnerable presence too. They need to see you as a person, not just as a function or a service. They need to know what makes you laugh and what keeps you up at night. They need to witness you pursuing something that brings you genuine, real joy. That is how respect is built, and that is how lasting bonds are formed. Now we need to ask ourselves something brutally honest and maybe uncomfortable. Is it possible that our sacrifice was not purely about our children after all? Is it possible that some of that sacrifice was about filling our own emptiness inside? When you do not know what makes you happy as an individual person. When you have lost touch with your own desires and your own identity completely. It is so much easier to pour everything into someone else's life instead of yours. Your children become a project that gives your existence purpose and structure. Their achievements become your achievements by proxy and extension and association. Their failures become your failures, and their happiness becomes your happiness too. You are not living your own life anymore, you are living through theirs entirely. And that is an enormous amount of pressure to place on any human being. Especially on your own child who never asked to carry that sacred weight. The American psychologist Dr. Nathan Whitfield studied human motivation extensively over decades. He proposed that every person has a deep fundamental need inside themselves. The need to develop their own potential and become who they truly are meant to be. He called this the drive towards self-fulfillment and personal actualization in life. It sits at the very top of what humans need to feel complete and whole inside. But here is what happened to so many parents of a certain generation, unfortunately. They never got the chance to pursue their own self-fulfillment for various reasons. Economic hardship, limited opportunities, social expectations, gender roles all played parts. So instead of pursuing their own potential, they transferred it onto their children. My dreams were crushed, so you must succeed in my place became the unspoken motto. I suffered, so you must walk a path of roses became the hidden expectation always. This transfer seems loving on the surface, and it genuinely comes from love. But underneath it is a form of psychological outsourcing that damages both parties involved. The parent never heals their own unfulfilled longing, and the child carries double weight. There was a woman named Dorothy who lived this pattern to its fullest extent. For her entire adult life, she was known only as someone's mother in her community. She introduced herself that way, and others referred to her that way consistently. Her own first name had become almost irrelevant in her daily life and interactions. When her son got accepted into a prestigious university, Dorothy was overwhelmed with joy. When her daughter landed a high-level corporate position, Dorothy felt like she had one life. She walked through the neighborhood with her head held impossibly high with pride. She told everyone who would listen about her children's magnificent accomplishments proudly. But then both children got married and started building lives of their own, separate lives. They moved to different cities, and their phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Dorothy's sense of purpose evaporated almost overnight like morning dew in harsh sunlight. She felt hollow and lost and directionless for the first time in decades of living. She did not know what to do with herself when there was no one left to serve. Her days stretched out long and empty and filled with a quiet, desperate aching inside. Then something small but transformative happened one ordinary Tuesday afternoon to Dorothy. She wandered into a community center and saw a sign for a pottery class being offered. She almost walked right past it, thinking it was too late for her to start something new. But something made her stop and sign her name on that registration sheet anyway. The first few weeks were frustrating and humbling for Dorothy in that pottery class, actually. Her hands shook and the clay would not cooperate with her uncertain, trembling fingers at all. She felt foolish sitting among younger students who seemed to pick it up so naturally. But slowly, very slowly, something began to shift deep inside of Dorothy's chest area. She was creating something with her own hands for herself for the very first time. Not for her children, not for her husband, not for anyone else but herself only. The feeling was foreign and strange, like speaking a language she had forgotten long ago. But it was also exhilarating in a way she had not felt in 40 years of life. Within a year, Dorothy had become genuinely skilled at making beautiful ceramic pieces. She started giving them as gifts, and people genuinely admired her artistic eye and talent. She stopped calling her children with that desperate, needy tone in her voice finally. Instead, she started sending them photos of her latest creations with simple, happy messages. "Look what I made today," she would text with a picture of a glazed bowl. Her children noticed the change almost immediately, and something remarkable happened then. They started calling her more often, and the conversations felt lighter and more genuine now. They were no longer weighed down by guilt and obligation and unspoken expectations anymore. They were simply two adults connecting with another adult who had her own interesting life. Dorothy's daughter told her one day, "Mom, you seem so much happier now than before." And Dorothy realized her daughter was absolutely right about that simple observation too. She was happier because she had finally found something that belonged only to herself. She was no longer a satellite orbiting around her children's distant planets endlessly. She had become her own sun, generating her own light and her own gravitational warmth. And ironically, that independence drew her children closer than decades of clinging ever did. This transformation is not unique to Dorothy or to any one person's specific story here. It happens every single time a parent rediscovers their own identity and purpose in life. When you stop trying to live through your children, something almost magical takes place naturally. Your children stop seeing you as a burden or an obligation they must fulfill dutifully. They start seeing you as a fascinating independent person they genuinely want to know better. They start respecting you in a way that guilt and sacrifice could never ever achieve alone. Because respect cannot be demanded or earned through suffering and self-destruction ever. Respect is inspired by watching someone live with dignity, purpose, and authentic self-possession. When your children see you thriving on your own terms, living your own full life completely, they feel proud of you the same way you once felt proud of their achievements too. The relationship shifts from one of debt and obligation to one of mutual admiration instead. And that is the healthiest, most beautiful form of love that can exist between any two people. Now let us go to the deepest root of all of this together right now carefully. This might be the part that brings you the most comfort and healing today, I believe. A psychiatrist named Dr. Victor Harman studied people who survived unimaginable suffering firsthand. He spent years working with individuals who had endured the worst conditions possible in life. He observed that survival was not determined by physical strength or luck or circumstances alone. The people who survived were the ones who found meaning in their suffering and pain. Dr. Harman wrote that suffering itself has no inherent meaning or purpose on its own. But the attitude we bring to our suffering can transform it into something profoundly meaningful. This insight applies directly to every parent feeling betrayed by their children right now today. Many parents sit in empty houses after their children leave, feeling absolutely devastated inside. They ask themselves, what was the point of all those years of sacrifice and devotion? They feel a burning sense of betrayal rising up in their throats like bitter acid. They replay memories of sleepless nights and skipped meals and abandoned dreams over and over. And they wonder if any of it mattered to anyone at all in the final accounting of things. But here is where Dr. Harman's insight can change everything if you let it do so. You have a choice right now in this very moment about how to interpret your situation. You can see your children's independence as rejection and abandonment and betrayal of your love. Or you can see it as the single greatest proof that you succeeded as a parent completely. Think about that carefully and let it really sink into your bones right now, please. If your adult child can stand on their own 2 feet without needing you constantly, if they can build a career and maintain relationships and navigate life independently and well, if they can make decisions and handle problems without calling you in a panic every time, then you did exactly what a parent is supposed to do from the very beginning always. You raised a functional, capable, independent human being who can survive without you nearby. That is not betrayal, that is your greatest achievement and your most lasting legacy forever. If your 35-year-old son still could not function without your daily involvement and help, if he called you crying every time something went wrong in his adult life constantly, if he could not hold a job or maintain a relationship without your constant intervention always, would that really make you feel better about your years of sacrifice and devotion, honestly? Or would that actually be the most devastating evidence of failure as a parent imaginable? A child who cannot leave is not a child who loves you more than other children do. A child who cannot leave is a child you accidentally crippled with your overwhelming devotion. So when your phone is quiet and your children are busy living their own full lives, Instead of feeling abandoned, try feeling victorious, because that is what you actually are now. You won the long game of parenting, even if it does not feel that way right now today. There was a woman named Helen who struggled terribly with this exact realization for months. Her son David got married, and suddenly the daily phone calls dropped to weekly, then monthly ones. Helen felt like she was drowning in a sea of silence and abandonment and loneliness constantly. She could not sleep at night, and she lost her appetite and her will to do anything at all. The phrase "I gave up everything for this" kept running through her mind like a broken record. She resented her daughter-in-law without any real justification for those dark feelings inside. She picked fights with David over trivial things just to get a reaction from him somehow. She wanted him to feel guilty because his guilt meant he still cared about her existence. But one afternoon Helen sat in her garden and had a moment of painful, piercing clarity. She realized she was trying to hold her son hostage with the currency of her own suffering. She realized that every guilt trip pushed him further away, not closer to her at all ever. She realized that she had become the very thing she feared most, a burden to her own child. That realization broke her heart, but it also began to put the pieces back together slowly. Helen decided to change her entire approach to life starting that very same afternoon then. She signed up to volunteer at a local literacy center teaching adults how to read and write. She was terrified at first because she had not done anything for herself in over 30 years. But the moment she sat down with her first student and saw the light in their eyes, something inside Helen woke up from a very long and very deep and very dark sleep. She discovered she was an extraordinary teacher with patience and warmth and natural skill. Her students adored her, and she found a sense of purpose she had not felt in decades. She was no longer waiting by the phone for David to validate her existence and worth. She was too busy changing lives and building something meaningful of her very own instead. And then the most beautiful, unexpected thing happened in Helen's life quite naturally. David started calling more often because the pressure had been completely lifted off of him. He called because he wanted to, not because he felt obligated or guilted into doing so. Their conversations became real and warm and filled with genuine mutual interest and caring. Helen would tell David about her students, and he would tell her about his work projects. They laughed together in a way they had not laughed in years, or maybe ever before actually. David told Helen one day that he was proud of her, and those 4 words meant everything. Not because Helen needed his approval anymore, but because it came freely and honestly from him. Helen said something profound that I think every parent needs to hear right now today. She said, "When my son does not call, I just think he must be doing well, and I smile." She said, "I am happy with my own life now, so one phone call cannot break me anymore." That is freedom, and that is what healthy love between a parent and child actually looks like. The great psychologist Dr. Carl Jensen spent his career studying the stages of human development. He believed that the second half of life has a very specific and important psychological purpose. He called it the process of individuation, finding your true authentic self beneath all the roles. Beneath the role of parent and spouse and employee and community member lies something deeper. There is a core self that has been waiting patiently for decades to be acknowledged and expressed. For many parents, especially those who sacrificed everything, that core self has been buried alive. It has been suffocated under layers of duty and obligation and self-denial for so long. But it is still there, breathing faintly, waiting for you to come back and rescue it finally. Individuation is not selfish, and it is not abandoning your family or your responsibilities at all. It is the natural and necessary process of becoming whole before your time here is done. It is about peeling away the masks and the roles and discovering who you actually are inside. What do you love when no one is watching and no one needs anything from you at all? What did you dream about before the world told you those dreams were not practical enough? What makes your heart beat faster in a way that has nothing to do with your children? Those questions are not luxuries, they are necessities for your psychological survival and health. Parents who cannot let go of their children often share one devastating common trait together. They cannot tolerate being alone with themselves for any extended period of time at all. Solitude terrifies them because in solitude there is no one to take care of anymore. And if there is no one to take care of, then what is the point of existing at all? That question is the real monster hiding under the bed of every helicopter parent everywhere. It is not really about the children, it is about the existential void inside the parent. The children were just the most convenient and socially acceptable way to avoid facing that void. But avoidance has an expiration date and it always comes due eventually without exception ever. When the children leave, the void is still there, bigger and hungrier than it was before now. And now there is no one left to distract you from its gaping, demanding, relentless presence inside. This is why the transition to an empty nest hits some parents like a Category 5 hurricane. It is not just loneliness, it is an identity crisis of the most profound and devastating kind. You have to grieve the loss of the role that defined you for decades of your living life. And then you have to build something entirely new from the wreckage that grief leaves behind you. That sounds terrifying, and honestly it is terrifying at first without any question or doubt at all. But it is also the most liberating and beautiful thing you will ever do for yourself too. Let me tell you one final story about a woman named Patricia who found her way through this. Patricia had spent 40 years being the perfect, devoted, self-sacrificing mother to 4 children. She cooked and cleaned and drove and organized and managed every detail of family life always. When the last child moved out, Patricia felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet completely. She spent months sitting in her quiet, empty house staring at photo albums and crying softly alone. She scrolled through her children's social media accounts obsessively every single night before sleeping. She counted how many days passed between their text messages like a prisoner counting days left. She noticed they posted photos of dinners and vacations and celebrations she was not included in. Each photo felt like a knife turning slowly in the center of her already broken, aching heart. One night Patricia caught a glimpse of herself in the bathroom mirror and she froze completely still. She saw a woman who looked 20 years older than she actually was, standing there staring back. A woman with hollow eyes and slumped shoulders and a face carved by years of unshed tears. A woman who was waiting for permission to exist from people who did not even know she was waiting. That mirror became Patricia's turning point, her rock bottom and her launching pad all at once together. The next morning she put her phone in a drawer and walked out the front door purposefully and firmly. She went to a bookstore and bought a journal and a calligraphy pen set on pure impulse alone. She had always loved beautiful handwriting ever since she was a little girl in school decades ago. But she had never pursued it because there was always something more important to spend money on. There were always school fees and grocery bills and her children's endless activities to fund instead first. Patricia sat at a coffee shop that morning and opened her journal to the first blank page carefully. She wrote her own name in slow, deliberate, beautiful letters across the top of that empty page. It was the first time in 40 years she had written her own name for her own pleasure alone. Her hand trembled and her eyes filled with tears, but these were different tears than before now. These were tears of reunion with a self she had abandoned so long ago she forgot it existed. Patricia began practicing calligraphy every single day with the dedication she once gave her children. At first her mind would drift constantly to worry about her kids and resentment about their absence. But the meditative rhythm of ink on paper slowly began to quiet those anxious racing thoughts inside. She found a calligraphy group that met weekly and made friends who knew her as Patricia. Not as someone's mother but as Patricia, the woman with elegant handwriting and a warm, gentle laugh. Within a year, Patricia held a small exhibition of her calligraphy work at a local library space. She had created 30 pieces, each one more beautiful and confident than the one before it was. She sent a simple invitation to her children, expecting nothing and preparing for disappointment again. But all 4 of them showed up without being guilt or pressured or reminded even one single time. They walked through the exhibition with wide eyes and something Patricia had never seen on their faces. It was not gratitude or guilt or obligation, it was genuine, pure, undeniable admiration and respect. Her youngest daughter said, "Mom, I had no idea you could do this, it is absolutely stunning work." Her oldest son said, "I wish I had known this side of you when I was growing up at home." Patricia realized in that moment that her children had been starving for exactly this all along. They had been starving for a mother who was more than just a service provider to them. They wanted a mother who was a full, complex, interesting human being in her own right completely. They wanted someone they could look up to and be inspired by, not just someone who served them. The devotion that once pushed them away was replaced by something far more powerful and lasting. Patricia's independence and self-fulfillment drew them in like moths to a warm, glowing, gentle light. Now Patricia says something that makes her children laugh every time she says it to them casually. She says, "If you kids do not call me, I figure you are all doing just fine without me today." She says, "I have got my own life to live and it is turning out to be pretty wonderful actually." Her children call her more now than they ever did during all those years of smothering devotion. Because now calling Mom is a joy and not a chore or an obligation or a guilt trip at all. Between parents and children there must be a healthy boundary that both sides honor and respect. That boundary is not a wall and it is not a rejection of love or family bonds whatsoever. It is the minimum distance required to see each other as full, complete individual human beings. When you stand too close to someone you cannot see them clearly, you only see a blur of need. When you step back just enough, suddenly their features come into focus beautifully and clearly now. You see their strengths and their struggles and their unique beauty as a separate person from you. And they can finally see you too, not just your sacrifices but your humanity and your spirit inside. That distance that terrifies so many parents is actually the birthplace of genuine, true closeness. It is where real conversations happen and real understanding grows between two independent, loving souls. You have worked so hard for so long and carried so much weight on your tired shoulders always. Without your dedication and your sacrifice, your children would not be who they are right now today. That is a fact that no amount of distance or silence can ever erase or diminish at all ever. But now it is time to set that medal of honor down gently and walk away from the podium finally. That medal belongs to your past and it is a beautiful past that you should be deeply proud of. But it cannot become the chain that keeps you anchored to a role that no longer exists anymore. You are more than someone's parent, you always were, even if you forgot that truth along the way. There is a person inside you who has been waiting so patiently for their turn to finally live. A person with dreams and curiosities and talents that have been sleeping for far too long now. It is time to wake that person up and introduce them to the world with pride and with joy. Take even half of the energy you poured into your children and redirect it toward yourself now. You are allowed to do that and you deserve to do that without guilt or shame or apology ever. You have earned the right to live for yourself by spending decades living entirely for others before. When devotion feels like it has been repaid with betrayal and silence and distance from your kids. That is the precise moment when you need to love yourself more fiercely than you ever have before. Your children are not your property, and they are not trophies that prove your life had meaning and worth. Your children were beautiful guests who stayed in your home for a season of your life together. They were meant to arrive and grow and eventually walk out the door into their own sunlight ahead. Your job was to prepare them for that departure, and you did that job magnificently and completely well. Now let them go with grace and with a full heart and with complete trust in what you built. And then turn around and walk back into the quiet, beautiful house of your own precious self finally. Rearrange the furniture and open the windows and let fresh air fill every single dusty room inside. Plant a garden or learn an instrument or write the book you always said you would write someday. Travel to the place you pinned on a map 40 years ago and never got around to visiting yet. Sit in a cafe alone with a cup of coffee and a good book and feel perfectly complete inside. When you are whole and happy and living fully in your own beautiful independent life at last. Your children will feel it even from 1,000 miles away without a single word being spoken. They will feel the warmth of a parent who is at peace, and that warmth will draw them home. Not out of guilt or duty, but out of genuine love and desire to be near your glowing light. That is the love that lasts forever, the love that flows freely without conditions or keeping score. I hope these words have given your heart a small moment of comfort and recognition today here. You are not alone in this struggle, and your feelings are completely valid and completely understandable always. But you also have more power than you realize to change the story starting right now, this moment. The next chapter of your life can be the most beautiful one if you have the courage to write it. And you do have that courage, because anyone who loved as deeply as you did is extraordinarily brave. Now take that bravery and aim it at yourself for once and see what incredible things happen next.